Rain, tire strategies, and pure chaos several times throughout the day led to an eventful 2023 Dutch GP. Jeremiah, what was your favorite part of the weekend?
My favorite part of the entire weekend, probably just the rain in general and how much chaos it caused for the race. But not just the race, the whole weekend. We'll touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, this is the 2023 Dutch GP. We're going to do some weekend observations. We're going to talk about our classic Turn 1 recap. And then we're going to go into some key moments that you might have missed throughout the race.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome to Turn 1's recap of the 2023 Dutch Grand Prix. We're your hosts, Thomas
and Jeremiah.
All right, let's do a little look back at some of the events that led up to race day. I know Jeremiah has some strong topics, especially on one driver that he'll touch on throughout this recap. But Jeremiah, walk me through the weekend pre-race day.
Pre-race day, we'll touch on practices. P1, honestly, all three practice sessions, Williams looked amazing. I don't know what it was. This track just suited their car phenomenally. They did awesome in practice. Fernando Alonso looked good all practice sessions too, which was great to see because he hasn't been that strong in the past couple races. It seems like Aston Martin's been falling behind. Whatever they did, it worked. P2 was a little scary. We saw Oscar Piastri wreck and then Danny Ricciardo come flying around that exact same corner. And he pretty much he had a decision to make. It was either hit Oscar Piastri or hit the wall. And so, of course, you don't want to injure another driver. So he dumps it. Unfortunately, it yanks the steering wheel, which causes it to yank his hand, breaking his hand. And so now Liam Lawson fills in for him for the race.
I think that shows just kind of real quick how these drivers, how they react to things in such amount of time. In like less than a half a second, he had to decide, am I hitting this other driver? Am I hitting the wall? And by deciding to hit the wall, he then took his ability to react away from that. And he had his hands on the wheel when he went into the wall. And as it whipped around, it broke his wrist.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, when you're traveling at 150, 160 miles an hour and you slap a wall, causing your tire to turn very abruptly, it's going to turn that steering wheel the same amount of abruptly. And it took his hand clean.
Not
what
off.
did they say? 2 weeks? I wasn't going to say off, but 2 weeks or 1 week did they say he was going to be out?
I think it's I think we're going to see Liam Lawson again.
I'll wrap this up. Practice to finish that off. Like I said, Albon, great all three practice sessions. Fernando, great all three practice sessions. Pretty much every single driver came off in practice sessions at least once, whether it was P1, P2, or P3. It's just wet. Nothing, no traction whatsoever.
Who struggled the most?
Charles Leclerc. We'll talk about that. Don't worry. I'll give him his. Qualifying, Charles. I forgot my note for qualifying was very first note. Charles Leclerc can't take turn 1.
Just can't do it. Can't figure it.
Both Williams made it through. Ocon was the big surprise, out at 17th, out in Q1. Q2, both Williams made it through again going into Q3, which makes Logan Sargent the first American to crest the top 10 in qualifying since 1993.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So Q2 ends with Hamilton being the big surprise, going out in 13th. Albon finishes in the top 3 again. Q3, we see Sargent crash. Not the best move, but he made it into top 10, so he starts 10th. We see Charles Leclerc off again for like the 800th time, and Alex Albon finishes in 4th, with George Russell sneaking in that 3rd place spot.
I put the note down that George Russell was keeping, Mercedes ahead of Aston Martin by qualifying 3rd and beating out Alonso and Stroll. And then we get around to the Grand Prix, and boy, did those tables turn.
Well, all right, that's all I got for qualifying and practice. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we break down turn 1?
No, let me talk about the kind of the setup for this race just for a second. So going into the race, this could be 9 in a row for Verstappen, which would tie the most consecutive wins all time with Sebastian Vettel, I believe. This would also make it 3 Dutch Grand Prix in a row for him if he could win, because like we talked about in our preview, he's been the only winner since this race resumed since the 80s. And it was crazy. Right before they started the race, too, they put up previous winners, and it was Verstappen, Frost, and Lauda. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah, just gosh.
We're going like 3-4 generations back in F1 drivers. So right before we started the race, a couple of the teams were talking to their drivers on the radio, and one team said rain expected in 20 minutes. That was incorrect. Another team said rain expected in 5 minutes. That was more correct. Zandvoort is an interesting track. So as we kind of go through some of these key moments, and especially turn one, the key spot on the track is turn one because it's where the DRS zone ends, the main DRS zone for the track. It's where you have a lot of overtaking opportunities. You can go inside, you can go outside, you can carry speed through the turn unless there's rain. Teams were looking at a 1 or 2 stop strategy. That changed drastically as we got into the race. And I made this note right before it stopped. Accidents at this track can be common due to the bank turns, loss of grip at speed, gravel traps, and close barriers. And I think we hit all of those throughout this race.
Yeah, throw rain in there, and it's just one big hodgepodge.
Yep. Okay, let's get into turn one.
So I have to start this off by saying there's no changes for the top 7. And the only reason why everybody got a good getaway and the changes in the top 7 don't really start to take effect into more of turns 3 and 4 and going on from that. This is just the turn 1 breakdown. We will touch on what happens past that a little bit. But for turn 1 specifically, the top 7, nothing changes. Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Albon, Alonso, Sainz, and Perez. This is where things start to shake up. Leclerc passes Piastri by moving to the inside. Stroll takes advantage of a bad start by Sargent and Piastri by passing both of them. Piastri, horrible start, like I said. Gasly's going to move to the outside to pass Sargent. Hulkenberg's going to move to the inside to pass Hamilton and Sargent. Hamilton passes Sargent, but is passed by Hulkenberg, means pretty much no change in his position. Sargent with the worst start I've ever seen in my life as he gets passed by the entire field. Ocon passes Zhou, moves to the outside. Bottas passes Tsunoda and Zhou up the inside. Zhou with the bad start kind of gets bodged up there at the front, kind of doesn't get away as fast as everybody else. Lawson gets a good move, passes Tsunoda up the inside because Tsunoda is stuck braking early as he goes to the outside, gets caught up in traffic. Magnussen starts from the pits, so he's got a lot of catching up to do as he's now 4 seconds down.
Jeez. I will say a couple things that I liked. Touching on the top 7 into turn 1, I really liked the visual aspect of seeing both Russell in 3rd and Perez in 7th lock up at almost the same time as they were in the same spot of the track, and you see that white tire smoke from those 2 cars.
Yeah,
that was a cool visual. It didn't really affect the standing so much so, but Russell did get a bad jump, and I'll touch on that in a second. Your note on Sargent, you mentioned it was one of the worst starts. Him and Zhou, right? 2 of the younger guys on the track trying to make a name for themselves. They've gotten these chances in the past couple races, and they are not taking advantage of their chances. Like, dude, if you're going to start in 10th, you better be making some moves at turn 1, not being slow off the line.
Yeah, he moves from 10th to 14th. Zhou moves from 15th to 17th. It's just, even Tsunoda lost a position. I mean, it seems like if you're going to make a mark for yourself, if you're going to make a name, and these young guys like Zhou and Logan Sargent, who definitely need to make a name so that they can get maybe the call up to one of the bigger teams, you're not going to get a call doing stuff like that.
Nope.
You have to get off the line, especially if you're starting in 10th and you never, ever start in 10th. You need to capitalize on that.
Okay, coming out of turn 1 into turns 2 and 3, Russell with his lockup into turn 1 put himself in a bad spot track-wise, and maybe his tire was a little bit overheated, or maybe he gave it a flat spot. He was running slow right in the middle of the track. So you have old Fernando Alonso taking full advantage of this, dive bombing the inside corner on turn 3. You have Albon trying to make a move on the outside, but he's not as quick as Alonso, so he ends up staying where he's at. But Alonso does move into 3rd, Russell to 4, and Albon to 5. Perez in seventh. Him and Sainz had a day going back and forth at it for a while there. And then finally, as we approached the end of lap one, we started this race completely dry. Everyone on slicks, no question about it. We're about to have a nice sunny day in Zandvoort, yada, yada. Get around to like turn 14, 15 of this track, and it is a deluge, just a downpour of rain. Like the change from the start of the race to 50 seconds later was the most change I've ever seen in a race.
It was almost like, have you ever seen one of those videos online where somebody's filming in front of their car looking forward and it's bright and sunny, and then they film behind them and it's just downpour? It's like they were right on the edge of this thing when the race started. The second they get off the line, dry through every single turn until the last couple turns. And then all of a sudden, the entire straight that they all started on completely dry, drenched. And it was a pool out there.
In some of the circuits like Silverstone or Spa, some of the ones that are like expansive and go really far out from the start line and all that, you might hear, oh, there's rain at turn 13 or whatever. Circuit Zandvoort is very compact. And so if there's rain in one area of the track, there's rain in all the areas of the track. And so the whole track was underwater in a matter of minutes. And that led to some crazy lap 1 through 7-ish chaos, I want to say. Until things had finally died down. Okay, anything left for the first couple of turns, or do you want to dive into some key moments?
Let's do the chemo. Actually, you know what? I do have one point I do want to make. I want to touch on that one more time. You said that the first 6 laps were crazy. Nobody knew what strategy to do. Nobody knew at all what they were going to do. Some people were pitting, some people were staying out. And then those that didn't pit, you would think would have pit the very next lap. No, some people even past that stayed out. Alex Albon stayed out. Lando Norris stayed out. And I mean, obviously that was not the best cause. We see Perez climbing up the field with those inners on, but yikes. I mean, I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, you're faced with rain and it's a decision that comes, oh, hey, 5 minutes before the race.
And I think the crazy thing, so obviously lap 1 had the rain. Lap 2, you had half the teams come in, half the teams stay out. Lap 3, you had the other half come in and change. And so they're like the positions of the races were completely unknown. You didn't know who was where because you didn't know how many more pit stops they needed. And it was insane. And about 11 is when the teams had settled on whether they were staying on their inters or if they were going back to slicks. And then just 5 laps later, you have Logan Sargent going into a wall and bringing out a safety car on lap 16. And then the chaos is right back to where it was. Okay, well, is the rain coming back? Do we stay on these slicks? Do we get new? We just changed to slicks. Do I need to get new ones? Like there was a good 50 laps in this race of only 70 something laps where you didn't really know the true order of the race or where it's going to finish. A driver could be in 19th, but really be in 7th, and a driver could be in 7th and really be in 20th. And you had no idea.
You didn't even know what was the fastest tire at some points because it was like the intermediates were faster, and then all of a sudden the track dried up enough to where the slicks were getting better results, and it was some people were going fast, some people were going slow, and then 1 lap later those intervals would be reversed. They would be going slow and they'd be going fast. I mean, you had no idea what to do.
And then at one point everybody's on inters except for Esteban Ocon, who's on wets.
He's on full, but that ended up being the best strategy, and if it wasn't for that red flag, he would have dominated that next couple series of laps.
It's just the craziness of F1 and why I love these races. Okay, we're going to get into 5 key things that you might have missed that had a significant impact on the race. I'm going to cheat a little bit this week because I've got 5 big moments, but I've also got some honorable mentions that didn't necessarily play out, but had the race not had red flags at the end or whatever, they would have had a bigger impact. Okay, number 1, Fernando Alonso getting to 3rd on lap 1. We covered that coming out of the turn 1 that Jeremiah went through into turns 3, passing Albon and Russell. That set him up for the podium finish that he got.
That was a great move. I mean, he capitalized right off the jump, takes 2 spots from top drivers, dude. And he was just kind of hiding right behind the leaders for pretty much the entirety of the rest of the race. It was beautiful.
He ran not a strategy, but he ran a different race style than like Lando or Lewis did. So the mentality that Alonso went with was, I'm going to jump up as fast as possible. And once he got into that top 3, he just had to mimic the tire strategies of the people around him to hold place. Whereas Russell and Norris and Hamilton found their ways working down the pack every single time they made a decision, and they were always having to fight back to get back to the points, and it was just a constant struggle. Whereas Alonso made it to third on lap 1 and just had to mimic the Red Bulls, and he was good.
I want to say the announcers even, I can't remember if it was Crofty or Brundle, but one of them, they even mentioned that exact thing, basically saying that they knew that the rain was coming. They knew that the tire change was coming to intermediates or wet. So therefore, Fernando was on a mission to just burn out those tires.
Yeah. Make moves, dive bomb corner. Like it was a little bit dangerous, the move that he made on Russell. He did a last minute inside and okay, number 2, Verstappen boxes for dries before the race leader and his teammate Sergio Perez does, and Verstappen ends up taking the lead on lap 13. Jeremiah, do you remember the radio call that Mr. Perez made?
He goes, "Did Max undercut us?"
Engineer says, yeah, he did.
It's like, yeah, of course. Why would you not think he was going to undercut us? It's not like you were leading the race and should have had preferential treatment or anything.
So, they mentioned that, and I think it was actually, was it Bertie Collins, one of the kind of track reporters, that was like, oh, the leader would normally have preferential, treatment, and they get decided how to. That's just not how it works anymore. Like the race leader, if they're number 2 on the team and this is Max's home race and he's going for 9 wins in a row and he's leading the team, he's getting preferential treatment. Sorry, like he just is. I mean, if you're Sergio, you try to beat out the undercut, you try to cook, and he didn't. He got clearly beat by Max on the undercut.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, you kind of have to expect it. It's what was it? His 9th consecutive win today. Yeah, and that ties the record. On top of that, it was his home Grand Prix. On top of that, he is leading everything in the drivers. And I mean, I can see why they gave it to him. I just feel like that probably wasn't the best decision, especially when you have to worry about Sergio's confidence right now.
Yeah, one of 5 home Grand Prix. I mentioned this in the last one, but I actually forgot to go back to it. Max's home Grand Prix, real quick, side note, could be considered the Dutch Grand Prix. Spa, because one of his parents was born in Belgium, Austria, because that's where the Red Bull, the company, is based out of, Silverstone, because that's where the actual Red Bull factory was. And what was the 5th one? There was a 5th
Monaco.
Monaco, because that's where he lives now.
Because that's where his apartment is.
5 home Grand Prix for Max Verstappen.
Oh man.
Okay, next on the list, this is a little bit of a combo. Russell and Norris got lost early in the confusion, and they both struggled to work their way up the pack. But there's something that differentiated the two, and that was their tire strategy after lap 16. George Russell and Mercedes, I don't know if George Russell had much of a say in this. Mercedes decided to put George on full hards on lap 16 under the safety car, which were to carry him the rest of the 55 laps until the end. Lando Norris ran a much more conservative tire strategy, changing a few more times, especially changing on lap 63, which was very late, but ultimately put him at, where was he? 7th in the points or so?
Yeah.
So just a huge decision early on in the race by Norris in the McLaren and Russell and Mercedes that had 2 very different results.
I don't know that Mercedes putting George on hards was the worst call. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, it played out pretty gorgeously all the way up until he started having problems there at the end. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, while everybody else was pitting and trying to warm those tires up and trying to pass people, he was sitting in like 6th or 7th or something like that.
I think he got up to 7th.
Yeah. And after the horrible start that he had because of everything that went wrong and him ending up all the way at the back, that's pretty good.
Yeah, just punctured that tire that had been going for a really long time, didn't he? Well, maybe if that was a nice new soft or medium tire, it wouldn't have punctured so easy.
That's why you don't take a tire 50-something laps.
Kind of cooked at that point.
Yeah.
So there was that one. Okay, we have, let's see, 2 more. Alonso, okay, he's had 2 of the moments. He stuck to Sergio Perez on the safety car restart worked his way into the DRS zone, and basically just kept himself in the race. Like we mentioned from his first bullet point, which was taking third on lap 1, he just kept up with the Red Bulls. Like whatever he did was just keep up with these guys, and I'm going to get a podium.
I don't think it came to a point where I don't think he was worried anymore about Ferrari or Mercedes or honestly even McLaren, just because of the fact that they kind of took themselves out of the race early on.
Yep, they were back there fighting with Liam Lawson and Nico Hulkenberg and Lance Stroll. They were
not Danny Ricciardo though.
Not Danny Ricciardo, Liam Lawson. But that track is so congested. It's not wide open. You can't do high flying overtakes like you can in some of the other tracks. And so once you're kind of stuck behind a train of cars, you maybe get one overtaking chance a lap, maybe, if you're lucky. So that was huge for him just to stick with Sergio Perez. And as we approach the end of the race, Sergio gets slapped with a 5-second penalty, gets bumped down to 4th, and you have Alonso in 2nd, even though he had already made that pass because of Sergio's extremely long pit stop, which is actually number 5 on this list. So number 5 ties right back into number 4. Sergio Perez had a 10+ second pit stop on lap 61.
This bothered me so much just for the sheer and simple fact that he had timed it perfectly. If he had gotten off those tires and gotten back out there with one of his normal 2.2 or heck, even one of the record breaking ones that he has where it's below 2 seconds or whatever it was, or I think it was 2.0 something, regardless, if he had one of those pit stops, he probably could have had a chance of coming out ahead of Max and having a good lead, I want to say, or even some kind of advantage over what he had presently.
Yeah. There was so much that got messed up. His pit stop strategy I'm going to blame Red Bull on this, not Sergio, because, the 10-second pit, okay, horrible, whatever, didn't have the tires figured out. But then he also pits right as the red flag is triggered, and he got very lucky with that only putting him in 3rd and not being like 6th or 7th.
They had him at 6th or 7th. Up until they made that switch to call it to the lap before, right before that incident, or right after that incident of his happened, and he came back in behind Fernando. They had him at 6th or 7th. I can't remember what it was, but if that would have completely changed the outcome of this race, everybody would have had more points. And what is his 2nd place standings? I guess he still would have had that by quite a bit. But
well, whenever so I was sitting on my couch watching this, and whenever he pit, it said, Perez in the pits next to his little time thing, and then that red flag popped up, and I went, no, and I jumped off the couch, and I was like, no, Sergio.
Dude, it was wild too, because they came in, changed his tires, he gets going again, heading towards the exit. It's green, like seconds before he reaches the light, boom, red, and he has to slam on the brakes. I was like, oh, come on.
At least they, like I said, at least they went back to where it was. I'm sure some of the drivers weren't too happy with that, just knowing how that works. We've talked about it before with some historical races that went back to previous lap times to determine results. Right. And some really like that and some really don't. So, okay, there's the 5 key things that you missed. I have a couple honorable mentions for you. 1, Leclerc, and I know you'll probably talk about this a little more. His first lap pit stop took like 40 seconds.
They didn't even have the tires out there.
Didn't have the tires. And then his second pit stop, he had to have a wing change that they probably should have caught earlier than they did and not have to have Carlos tell him about it.
Yeah.
On lap 26, the dude got passed like 100 times. There's not even that many drivers on the track. What a horrible day for Charles.
He's back there battling with Liam Lawson, just trying to give it everything he's got. Ferrari comes on and they're like, hey, man, this issue's not getting any better. We got to call it.
I also put, I made this note during the race, will Zhou being in 3rd early on due to the pit stop chaos work out? Because I was like, man, Zhou could really kind of redeem himself from that 4th place start that he had a few weeks ago and maybe get some solid points here. And then he slides off the track and flies into a wall, much like his Silverstone incident, and he's out of the race. That one didn't pay off.
No.
I had will Albon and Piastri staying on slicks for the start pay off? Maybe
it's hard to tell.
Because they both finished 8 and 9, so I think their strategies worked out evenly. But I don't know if that's just naturally where they would have fell if they had followed the pit stop strategy of everybody else, changing to inters earlier, or if that was a mistake and they could have finished higher. I don't know.
It's not like they finished bad in the points. But
I know this is one that you're big on, and this is the last one before we get into the race results and our winners and losers. Lando, Lewis, and Oscar just had a day.
yeah, the second that the whole race, I mean, the rain scenario happened and everybody had all this confusion, they got sucked to the back of the grid and they stayed in this little pattern of Lando, Lewis, and Piastri, and they carved back up through the grid together. It was like Lando would pass somebody, and then eventually Lewis would catch them, pass them, and then Piastri would pass them, and then it was back to those three in concession again. And finally, I think nearing the end, I want to say like 3/4 through the race, Lewis finally got a run at Norris. And then those two pretty much battled it out for the rest of the race. But that was awesome to see those three just carving through the pack together.
There was that battle, and then there was the was it Sainz and Gasly? And Sainz just could not get around Pierre Gasly.
I guess it was just defensive mastermind driving there for some reason. But yeah, Sainz was definitely struggling back there.
This was a really good race for fans to watch. It was a little long with the safety cars and the red flag. I skipped through that, because we're watching on delay. But I mean, just the chaos of the rain and the not knowing where anybody is and the constant position changing and the really good battles for position. I liked almost everything about this race.
There might have been somewhere between 10 and 20 laps through of this entire 71 lap race that weren't interesting, that didn't have action, that wasn't exciting to watch. The entirety of the race, besides those 15, 20, 10, whatever laps, just awesome to watch, man. It was good racing.
I don't know how to find this. It's got to be listed somewhere, but I'd be curious how many total position changes there were. Not like overtakes, but like with people in the pit and in and out of the pit. It's got to be hundreds.
Yeah, it's one of those I wanted to cover. I don't remember if we covered this or if it was a thought that I wanted to cover in one of our videos, but there was a race in the past that had the same thing. It has the record for the most overtakes. And when you watch it, it's just.
Hang on. With 186 overtakes, the race set the record for the most overtakes in a single race.
I was just about to talk about the race, I guess the previous record holder. Wow. We just got to witness a record.
Yeah, and I could easily see how. It was
I believe it.
Chaos.
I believe it.
Okay, so your race finishes, and I'm going to give the actual like points finishing order, not the finishing order, because there's one caveat in here. You have Max Verstappen, Alonso, Gasly, Perez, Sainz, Hamilton, Norris, Albon, Piastri, and Esteban Ocon sneaking into the top 10. The caveat is that Sergio Perez actually finished third, but got slapped with his little 5-second time penalty for his pit stop violation and moves down to fourth behind Pierre Gasly.
Pit stop violation? You mean slapping a wall and speeding?
Sounds like a drunk driver leaving a bar.
Yes. Oh, he just couldn't get slowed down enough. Slaps that wall, and then because he slapped that wall, he didn't get to slow. He wasn't steady on the brakes. Didn't get slowed down enough. And I think what they calculated it out as was he broke the speed limit by 1/2 mile per hour.
Oh,
yeah.
It's not like when you're going down the highway and you're like, oh, they'll give me 3 or 4 miles an hour over.
No, speed limit's like, I don't know, 60, 50, 40, whatever it is. And he was going 1/2 mile per hour under that.
Man. Okay, some winners and losers. Jeremiah, I will give mine. You give yours. I have 4 winners. They might overlap with yours. That's okay. Max, that's 9 in a row, 3 Dutch GPs in a row. The dude, this whole season is a big win for Max Verstappen. I mean, man. Number 2, Fernando Alonso. Been struggling a little bit. The Aston Martin team has been not where they were for the first 8 or so races of the year, 7 or so races of the year. Good to see him get back, get a second place finish, and have a really good strategic day, I think. There was no errors on his part or the Aston Martin's team from his race seat. Number 3, Pierre Gasly. It seems like once a year he has a really good race. And that's kind of his thing.
Okay.
And then finally, Alex Albon. I think this guy is making a very good case to race for a better team. He has a little bit of inconsistency. He'll slap a wall on you. He'll, start high and finish low. But the dude is a speed demon, and he's showing that he can get some results every once in a while. He's doing what we want to see out of Logan Sargent and Zhou Guanyu. He's doing it.
Yeah. Let me hit my winners before you dive into losers. Then we'll just kind of have them both listed. Did you say Fernando Alonso as a winner, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, so the four names that you said, I have the exact four names. Let me rephrase that. I've got one winner and 19 losers. Let me just know.
Max Verstappen.
Yeah. I got Max Verstappen for the obvious reasons. The three Dutch championships, or the three Dutch wins now, this 9 consecutive wins, the everything, man. I mean, he's like, I want to say, what is the points total? If you took, not exactly. I was going to say if you took the person in second and doubled their points, but
Not quite. Almost.
if
But
you
not
take the
quite.
person in third and double their points,
Hey, you know who didn't win 9 in a row? Alberto Ascari, because they only raced like 6 races.
okay. Um, I have Max for the obvious reasons. Alex Albon, great qualifying, great practices, and great recovery drive.
Yeah.
He obviously got sucked to the back because he stayed on slicks and everybody else fought his way back up to 8th. I wanted to touch on this because you said this, and because you said it, I'm going to go ahead and dive even further into it. Yes, he absolutely should be getting a drive for a better team. I've been saying this since the beginning of the year because of how well he did last year. And the fact that he's just proving it again for the second time and doing better just makes the case even more. He was young. He was scared of that Red Bull when he had the opportunity. He wasn't ready. I'm telling you now, he is.
Yeah, I agree. He wasn't ready. We've talked about this before. He wasn't ready for the Red Bull car at the time. He wasn't ready to be a top team driver.
Yeah.
But could he be a midfield, an upper midfield driver, like an Alpine? Yep, probably.
I mean, if Pierre Gasly can do it, Alex Albon can do it.
I mean, I would say another team higher than Alpine, but he's not taking a McLaren seat. He's not taking a Ferrari seat. He's not taking the Red Bull's not going to bring him back. So it's kind of tough to say much higher than Alpine right now.
They're going to drop Oscar Piastri.
No. But I mean, I'm trying to think, like, Williams is even a decent team right now, mainly because of him, but Alpine would be the next clear step up, I think.
All the other teams under Alpine are pretty much all tied for the same position.
Yeah.
As far as my winners keep going, Fernando Alonso, I have him. We already touched on this. Stayed with the leaders the entire race and capitalized at the end. It was a masterclass by Fernando Alonso today. And in a scenario where he hasn't been finishing on the podium, even though he started the season finishing on the podium every single race, we're starting to get a little worried about how that Aston Martin was doing in comparison to everybody else. We don't know 100% because the race wasn't dry, but he definitely took advantage of the wet, and you can't take anything away from him on that. I have Pierre Gasly also started 12th, finished 3rd. I mean, what more can you say in the Alpine, and especially if you look at Pierre Gasly's last few races, I think his highest he's finished is like 10th or 9th. And he's had DNFs. He's had finished 13th out of the points. So to see him up there, that warms the heart, man.
Yeah, his highest finish this year has been 7th in Monaco before this.
Yeah, and I want to say if you look at his last 3 races, he's got 2 non-points finishes.
Yes, 3. He went 18, retired, and 11th.
Oof, just missed it. Well, that's not the case this time.
Yeah, every year, like I said, it seems like he has a good drive. So this year he got 3rd. Last year in Azerbaijan, he got 5th. The year before that, he got another 3rd. The year before that, he got his win at either Monza or Imola, one of the two. So I think he's just a perpetual midfield driver.
Maybe. I mean, until we could see him in another scenario, that's all we've got to go off of.
We saw him at Red Bull, dude.
Again, another scenario like Alex Albon.
But I don't think he wasn't as inexperienced as Albon was. I think Pierre had a true shot and blew it.
Yeah, that was tough because the very next year he goes back to AlphaTauri and destroys at AlphaTauri. It's like all the pressure was off and he was able to drive like he could drive.
All right, you ready for some losers and we'll wrap this thing up?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, loser number 1. I'm sorry, man. Zhou Guanyu. The dude was running in 3rd. He might have even gotten higher than 3rd with the pit stops for a little bit. I can't remember. And then he crashes. And it's like, if you're, like we said, for weeks and weeks, if you're going to find yourself in a crazy good situation, starting in 4th on the grid, up in 3rd, like legitimately, like he wasn't like, oh, it might be 3rd, but he's really in 12th. No, he was legitimately running 3rd pit stop wise in that race. And he flies off the track. Yeah. Zhou Guanyu. You got to keep it on the track, man. Even if you give up a spot, slowing down in a turn, fourth is a whole lot better than being out of the race.
Yeah, that was what, last race that he qualified in fourth or something ridiculously
Hungary,
high,
yeah.
and then just again, same scenario, DNF, just not a good look for Zhou Guanyu.
George Russell, early on, he was questioning his team. He said, "How did we mess this up so much? I was forecasted to get a podium," and then he found himself in like 19th, and he had worked his way back up to 7th on his really old tires, and then he hits Lando maybe and punctures it, and he drops back. We thought he was retired. Remember, he came on and said, "I'm out," limps into the pit stop. I guess they threw a new set of tires on. He goes back out there. He finishes essentially dead last in 17th. Not what you want when you start third in a Mercedes.
I had a real problem with this radio call. The fact that he said I was forecasted a podium. I'm sorry, you're not forecasted anything, and you better go earn it. So get off the mic, stop whining, and go drive.
Jeremiah's throwing a work ethic problem at George Russell.
Well, don't come whining,
what?
dude. You're not projected anything. You're not forecasted anything. You're not promised anything.
We haven't looked into this, but similar to when he did his radio call, he said, "Guys, I'm out." And then the team puts a new set of tires on, he goes back out. Like, dude just gave up that easy? Okay.
That's what I'm saying, dude. I didn't like that. It was a bad look for George.
He's lost his role as Mr. Consistency. That's another thing that he had that he doesn't have anymore. So it's a little bit interesting how that's working out.
Agreed.
Next loser, the entire Aston Martin team. Now, I know we gave Fernando a win. Hang on. They are so not catching up to Mercedes anymore in the standings. They've been passed thoroughly. They might be beaten by Ferrari when this thing is all said and done.
So how does them not being where they were in the standings for the entire year make them a loser for the race?
Because where did Lance Stroll start?
Lance Stroll is irrelevant. He has been in every single race for this season.
Started 11th, finished 11th. He made no progress in the chaos in a top 4 or 5 car.
I gotta say, if you're gonna say a loser for this one, it has to be Lance Stroll. You can't call Fernando a loser.
It's the team, because Lance Stroll, his standings don't matter in this case. Aston Martin, who's fighting to be the second constructor, very much so matters. And the fact that they have one driver getting second and another driver getting no points consistently, the team loses.
If that's the case, they're a loser for every single race until they fire Lance Stroll.
Okay, then I'll keep that on this list for every single race. Okay, last one. This one's a little bit off the wall. Nick DeVries is a loser. So Nick DeVries, you're the driver for AlphaTauri, and you get cut. And you're not just like removed to reserve driver or test driver. No, you are thoroughly cut. So much so that when the driver breaks his hand, they bring in some dude that no one's ever heard of from F2, Liam Lawson, to drive your car that you drove for half the year. Loser.
He didn't even race, man.
Loser. Just complete garbage from Nick DeVries.
Jeez.
That's got to be the biggest kick in the teeth, is the fact that he drove that car for a half a year, not really wrecking it or crashing it, just not getting results. And he's not the first one back in it when the guy breaks his hand.
Gosh, their losers are harsh for this race.
All right. Did you have any losers?
I've got 2. You didn't name either one of them, so that's good. I'm going to spend more time on one than the other, so I'll mention the latter first.
Okay.
Logan Sargent is my first loser of the day.
Yeah.
Great practice sessions, awesome qualifying, crashed in the race. Dude, you cannot do that. You just can't. If you're going to qualify 10th, you have to at least finish in the top 13, but you should finish in the top 10. He had an awesome opportunity and he completely wasted it. I understand it was wet. I understand, but dude, you wreck out on almost every single race. Like, I'm getting tired of it.
You got to go slower.
I'm getting tired of it.
Just like we talked about with Joe, take a turn slower. If that's a dangerous turn, they've done these races in simulators in the rain. You know where your hot spots are.
Drive defensively, drive slower, stay on the track. That's it. That's the name of the game. You cross the finish line and then you get points. That's how it goes. If you don't get points, if you don't cross the finish line.
It's not even like it was some late race heroics. It was lap 16. It'd be better if he was dive bombing a corner and hit a guy, like trying to make a move to get points at the end. No.
it's one of the, I feel for the guy. I do. But it's one of those things where if you're going to be the representation of America and all of the American fan base, dude, finish the race.
He needs to fully embrace Ricky Bobby. We need to get a Fig Newton sticker plastered across his visor. We need to get a Puma logo on his car.
Hold up a sign that says, "Help me, Tom Cruise."
All right, who's
right.
your last one? Your big one.
My last loser, and this is the one that I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes bashing.
Oh, no.
Not really.
I got to edit some stuff out.
Charles Leclerc. Dude, you are a loser today. You went off in practice sessions that I counted alone 4 times. That's all that I counted, and I skipped ahead. I mean, qualifying, you went off 5 times. That's 11 times or 9 times in the race hasn't even started. That's just what I counted. Then the race starts. Go a little bit off here, recorrect. You go a little bit off here, recorrect. Go a little bit off here, destroy your floorboard. You're done for the race. You now get passed by back markers until you finally give up and the team calls the car in. That was a horrible, pathetic race. And you can't even blame it on Ferrari. Carlos Sainz finished the race. He didn't get any penalties, didn't go flying off the track and ruin the car. You can't blame that on on Carlos. That was just bad driving by Charles Leclerc.
The funny thing about Leclerc was that when he drove over the curb and through the gravel trap and all that, he was on inters. Like that was that was the point of the race where like the teams were debating slicks or inters, right? And there was a clear grip advantage for the team on inters, and yet he's the one flying off gravel.
That's another problem that I had is those 9 times that he went off in practice and qualifying I had mentioned. All of those were on inters as well, except for maybe 1 or 2 on slicks. The dude had no control over his car. He went off in turn 1 in the practice sessions like 5 times alone, just turn 1. It seemed like every single time he would go and try and get a lap time so that they could see what the car's going to do. It's like, all right, here we go. We're at the end of the straight and turn 1 right off the end. And then this whole lap is abandoned. Have to go around again. Goes around again, goes off at turn 1, abandon the lap, go around again. This happened 3 times in a row for 3 straight laps. I watched this. This was a horrible, horrible weekend for Charles Leclerc.
I agree. And I do question if that car setup is just poor, which is the team thing. But if you're the driver driving the car and you know it has a poor setup, you need to figure out how to drive it. And I'll refer to every driver that was running on slicks on laps 2 and 3 of the Dutch Grand Prix. They were going so slow because they knew the limits of their car. And I wonder if Charles saw the standings, or maybe his team told him what was happening, but they said, hey, Sergio just went from last to first on inters in a matter of like 55 seconds. And Charles thinks, I can do that. No, you can't. You don't have that Red Bull car. You need to do what your car can do on inters, which is not pushing it as much as they can.
I don't understand it. I really don't. It's not like he doesn't know the car. He's been driving it all of this year, and it's not that far off from last year's car. It's not, I don't know why he could think he was driving the Red Bull. I mean, geez, he's been staring at the back of the Red Bull every single race for the entire season. Then you're going to go out there and try and drive like them? That's not going to happen.
Okay, can you this week give a regular call to our audience for a question? Because I kind of have one that I want to ask.
Oh, you want to do the funny one? All right. Guys, if you noticed anything else from the race, if there's anything that might have stood out that we just did not hit on, please let us know down below. We can touch on it in a short, maybe even mention it in one of the weekly episodes. Let us know.
Guys, if you think Liam Lawson is going to overcome the 339-point deficit to Max Verstappen before the end of the season, let us know. We want your thoughts.
I'm here for you. I stand with them.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.